So this video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hey, what's going on everybody? It's that one camera guy back at again with another video for you. Today we're taking a look at the Canon 90D. I've got it in my hands here. I did a quick rental from lensrental.com. They're not sponsoring this, paid out of pocket for that rental. So I can go ahead and test out the camera in sports and video and photos here and there. And this video is really an initial impressions and mini review of the camera based on my early thoughts on it. I will give my thoughts in relation to Sony cameras towards the end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But I got a good list and a bad list, and I want to go over that with you. But before I jump into that, I do want to mention, quick background, I came from Canon, shot with Canon before, 5D Mark IV, 3, 2, I had the 1 for some reason, the 1D series. I sold all those cameras off at some point. At my job, I'm a teacher. My students use Canon 80Ds. So I have quite a few of them. And so I really did want to check out the 90D. I wanted to see what the improvements were and whether or not it'll benefit if we upgrade to those cameras for my students in terms of sports shooting, which we do a lot of. So let's go ahead and dive into the good and the bad. So bad, we'll start there. The first thing on my list is that there's this weird slow image playback when it comes to looking at your picture. So if I fire a photo, it's gonna take like a second before the photos show up on the back of the screen. I could have sworn on the 80D, it's pretty quick. Like you fire and it shows up right away. And it's not even like I'm firing a lot of burst. It's like I'm just taking one photo, whether it's RAW or JPEG, there is a slight delay. Not a deal breaker, but it is something for you to wanna know. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. I don't know if it came up in anybody's reviews, but it is kind of, it's not good. It's not good. Number 2, small buffer. I don't recall the number, maybe I'll put it on the screen, but when I was shooting football, subject was running with the ball, fired off frames, held the shutter button down, and it hit that buffer pretty quick in my opinion. You know, I was spraying and praying intentionally, but it will hit it, especially shooting in RAW. I used an UHS-1 card, I said swap to that, and I hit the buffer, and it took a while for the card, for the camera to write the files to the card. It surprised me. Then I went back to the UHS-2 card, fired off, and it did hit the buffer, but if I just let go slightly, came back to firing, it fired off again. So I would say make sure if you're gonna shoot sports and you're an amateur enthusiast, use a UHS-2 card. You definitely need it if you're shooting in RAW. Speaking about that, there is no dual card slots on this camera. So if you wanted that, you're gonna have to go to the Mark IV 1D series in order to get that support on this camera, which kind of sucks a little bit. Rear wheel isn't so good in my opinion in terms of build. It's kind of chintzy. It's okay, but it just feels a little, you know, I don't know how long it's gonna last. It just doesn't feel as good quality in terms of the other parts of the camera. When you go over to video, something I want to mention is we already know it doesn't have 24p, which isn't the end of the world for me per se because of how I expect to use it. But for some of you, it definitely could be. So it only has like 30p if you're coming from the US side of things, North America. Another thing that I noticed that I wish it had was a flat picture profile like Canon Log. I was shooting some 4K, it looked really good, but when you have such situations where there's a lot of variations in brightness, it would be nice to have a flat profile. I did install Technicolor CineStyle, I believe, on here to try and get a flat profile. It helps a little bit, but if Canon C-Log was on here, it'd be a nice bonus. Another thing too that Canon is not really doing a good job with, I think they're just trying to simplify the menu, but when you go into the menu, it's not as simple of, if you want to go to 4K crop because you have a 4K crop option, it's not as simple as choosing 4K and then 4K crop. It's not there. You got to activate it as a menu option. And then if you want slow motion, 120 frames per second, you also have to activate it. There should just be 4K, 4K crop, 120p. It's not there. You got to activate those options in order to get them, which is strange. They really should just streamline it. I know they're trying to avoid confusion, but it just slows things down if you need to switch between the two really quickly. Another thing is the dynamic range isn't too bad. Talking about photo-wise, you can see a little video of me kind of adjusting the highlights and shadows slightly in certain pictures. I think it's okay. I was thinking if you get it pretty close to where it needs to be in terms of exposure, you can bring back and pull back some highlights and shadows. It's probably not going to be at the same exact level as a Sony camera, but you definitely can pull some of those shadows and highlights on the camera. So I think that's a good thing. I can't really compare it, but it looks like it's good, but not as great. I think that was a good thing. All right, jumping over to the good list. The handling of the camera, very similar to the 80D. If you've used it before, you'll be right at home. The build is a little nicer, I think, in terms of the grip. It's deeper. So if you had the 80D and now you go to here, the grip is deeper, makes it easier for you to hold the camera. Feels a little bit more solid than the other one. The buttons and dials feel pretty good. The top buttons feel much better than the 80D. The mode dial, the top wheel. The rear wheel is the only one that feels it is technically better than the 80D, but it just feels chintzy. I like the multi-selector switch there. I was using it a lot shooting football because I was able to adjust my focus points and get the right composition when I needed it to, so that's a big bonus, but everything else feels pretty much the same. The viewfinder is very big and bright. I'm not sure if it's 100%, probably close to that, but I absolutely love shooting with the viewfinder over maybe like an electronic viewfinder on the APS-C Sony stuff. The 4K on the video side, so let's talk about that. There's no crop in 4K, thank goodness. Not like 2x crop or 2.2x crop or whatever. So that's a really nice aspect about the camera. The joystick I mentioned already. In photo, in live view, we also get eye autofocus. So I can hopefully show you a clip of that. Haven't really tested it out in the real world scenario, but you can see what it's able to do. It only works in one shot mode. It does not work in its servo. Face tracking also works in conjunction with eye autofocus in video, so hopefully you can see that as well. So it's a really nice feature that they threw in there, so that way your video autofocusing is just a little bit more accurate if you have to film yourself. So kudos to Canon on that. There is digital stabilization, digital IS, in 4K and in 1080p, so those are really good things too. Now, something I forgot to mention, speaking of video, is that when you're using a monitor and you want to maybe, do a clean HDMI out, which it does have, so it's going on the good side, but then jumping to the bad side, when you plug in that monitor, and let's say, for example, you want to monitor in 4K, you can't record while you're monitoring it, like with a small HD, for example. It won't let you record. I don't even think it works in 1080p. So you have to use an Atomos Ninja in order to record to the camera. So, that's a bad situation with the Canon. Don't know why they're doing that. Again, it's cripple hammer, I guess. So that's a downside to that. So before I start talking a little bit about the comparisons with the Sony stuff, I do want to jump into the photographic side and shooting with the camera. I shot some football with it Friday night, shooting some JV, and I thought the focus was pretty good. I really enjoyed going back to shooting with the Canon DSLR with the 10 frames per second. That burst is really nice. The viewfinder is bright, made it easier for me to track my subjects and keep up with what I was doing because there's no lag like if you use the Sony camera in that sense. So if you do want to check out the pictures that I took as well as the youth sports ones that I took, you can go ahead and find them on my website. They'll be linked down below. And speaking of websites, I do want to give a quick shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Again, really helping out with the rental costs to go ahead and do these reviews. So if you are looking to build a website and you're not really a coder, you don't want to do something really complex and you want something simple to use, consider checking out Squarespace. Now, if you use my coupon code CAMERAGUY, you can go ahead and get 10% off your first order at Squarespace. I've got a link down below that you can jump to, so that way they know that I sent you there, and supporting Squarespace does help support me. So make sure you check them out if you're looking to build your own website. Thanks, Squarespace. All right, speaking about this whole situation with autofocusing and getting into the Sony thing. At first, I thought when I was firing, I was seeing some slight 7D Mark II issues, because when I used the 7D Mark II, I had it for a little while, I noticed that when I was firing and taking pictures with it, the focus didn't always seem to be... Hey, I wanted to go ahead and cut in right now in Lightroom. I wanted to show you some of the image examples. I was looking at it a little bit closer with the 90D. So I've got this sequence going on right here, and I want to go and show you the focus of the image. I'm going to zoom in here 1:1. Notice how this initial shot's a little bit out of focus. This is single point that I'm shooting with. Single point AFC 10 frames per second. Obviously, you're going to notice some of that softness in the image, but then it kind of gets better, you know, and here and there it starts to improve slightly, and it looks pretty good. But it sticks to the guy there. My focus point, I believe, is towards the center. There you go. And we're going to keep moving. It still looks pretty good. I mean, it's acceptable. Now, here's one of those situations where that focus just kind of just veers off a little bit. I don't know where, you know, if it just went off or something, and then it kind of picked it up again. Then it's just a bit soft again. So that's the stuff I'm talking about with the softness. It didn't happen too often. Let's take a look at this sequence here. Slight softness there, either that or it's out of focus, and then boom, it hits in focus. So that's the sharpness that I'm sort of looking for in the image. Still doing okay. It's getting a bit softness. See, there's that softness I'm talking about with the image. So let's see. There's another one here. Okay. Running back comes in. It's looking pretty good. Slight softness there. Kind of goes out of blurriness. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. That one's looking pretty good in terms of sharpness. Like it's hitting focus. I'm keeping them in the middle. Now, I don't know what happened there. I think I zoomed out. Then it picked it up again. I lost focus. Obviously, my center point's not hitting it. And we're close. That one's pretty sharp. Out of focus. Again, some of it's my error. That's why I was saying that I wasn't too comfortable with some of it. Some of it's my own personal issue of not getting it on the target. So here's another one here. Here's the last example, I think. Starting there in the middle. Looks pretty good. Guys going through. Looks good. Looks good all the way through so far. Trying to keep them in the center. There we go. And still good. I kind of jar back and the focus picks up again. So, you know, I'm going to, like I said, I was giving a little bit of give or take in terms of potentially my issue with the focusing. I did a lot better with the youth sports, but it seems like it's doing okay. It's not doing too bad. It's just an issue of just making sure I keep them centered in the photos. Comparison to the 6400. So this is really the big kahuna in the room. If you are in the market, right, and you're looking for kind of this particular level of camera, 90D versus the 6400, or maybe you're looking at the 6600 and you're saying, okay, which one should you go ahead and get? It's pretty tough, I would say right now. The 90D has a lot of nice things going for it. I love the user interface on the Canon system. My students love it in terms of how to handle manual exposure, adjusting exposure, handling, everything. They really do enjoy it. In terms of the two, from my experience, I do like the DSLR on the 90D. Using the live view to be able to take photos, video, handling, I really like it. But there's always a but in this situation. If you want the most for your money in terms of specs, if the spec sheet is more important to you and you don't mind working around it, I would say from my initial perspective, the 6400 is still a good option to go with. Granted, okay, it depends on the system that you're in. If you are on a smaller budget, tighter budget, I would say the 90D would be the better option to go with over the 6400 because the lens lineup on the Sony side is still fairly expensive and there just isn't as many options. On the Canon side, there's a lot of really great lenses that work with it, especially with dual pixel autofocus, that have good compatibility. And there's lenses at almost every price range that you can think of. If you jump over the Sony side, you are going to pay a premium for the lenses that you might need, like a 70-200 f2.8. Whereas with the Canon side, you can get a 2.8 from a variety of different manufacturers and save quite a bit of money. So in the end game, it would be cheaper to go with Canon than it would be with Sony at this time. So I can't really tell you what the best answer is. All I know is if you're on a budget, I never recommend people to go to Sony technically. I would always go with Canon. But if you have the money, consider Sony because it just has the better features. The autofocus on the 6400 is still way ahead of the Canon system in my opinion. The object tracking and the video features, the slow motion with the sound options on there, everything about it is just a little bit better overall compared to the Canon. But if you're just used to wanting to have a good grip on something, good ergonomics, the 90D, I really don't think you can go wrong with it, but it's a really tough area to recommend. So let me know your thoughts about the Canon 90D and whether or not it's something you were considering or if you are in the crosshairs between Sony or Canon. If you have any questions, put them down below and I'll do my best to try and answer them. And with that said, folks, that's going to be it for the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other content. I'll see you later. Peace.